Hey guys, tonight we begin not on land, but on the open sea. Endless water stretching in every direction, with no promise that land will ever appear again. It's 1492, and you're aboard one of Columbus's ships. The wood creaks, the ropes groan, and the smell of salt mixes with sweat and fear. Every day feels longer than the last, and the horizon never changes. The world is vast, uncharted, and survival means braving storms, hunger, and the creeping thought that you may have signed up for a one-way trip. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations. You've just stepped aboard Columbus's Voyage, and there's no turning back. You wake up to the sound of wood, groaning like an old man's knees, except this old man happens to be the ship you're sleeping on. And unlike your uncle after Sunday dinner, this one doesn't stop complaining. The Santa Maria creaks and sighs with every wave, her timbers straining as though she knows full well she's carrying too many men, too many barrels, and far too many dreams of gold. You are wedged into a space so small that calling it a bed is generous. It's more like someone shoved straw into a wooden box, and then asked you to live there. You sit up, or rather, you try to, and hit your head on the beam above you. That's when you remember this is your life now, at least for as long as this voyage lasts. No turning back. The air is thick. Not the kind of thick that promises rain, but the kind that promises regret. 100 men packed onto 3 ships, none of whom have bathed in weeks, all of whom share the same air. The smell of sweat and fish, and something disturbingly like wet dog hits your nose before you've even stood. You think about the last time you smelled fresh bread baking, or washed linen, or even a clean shirt. Then you look around at the men beside you, snoring and scratching, and realize nostalgia is just another form of torture out here. You step onto the deck, and immediately the wind slaps you in the face like it has personal business with you. The Atlantic is endless, stretching out in every direction, a blue so deep it feels like it could swallow the ship whole. The horizon mocks you, always there, never closer. Some of the men still whisper that this voyage is madness, that you'll fall off the edge of the world, or that monsters the size of mountains wait out here. You don't know what's worse, the idea of being eaten by a sea serpent, or the idea of dying from boredom and bad food before you even see land. Speaking of food, breakfast is a treat. By treat, I mean hardtack. If you're not familiar with hardtack, picture a cracker made of flour, water, and spite, baked until it's as hard as a brick. Then picture it sitting in a barrel for weeks, collecting weevils, those cheerful little bugs that crawl out when you least want company. Most sailors knock the biscuit against the table to kill the weevils before eating. Some don't bother. Extra protein, they say. You bite into one and immediately wonder how teeth can break so easily on something that isn't stone. Somewhere back in Spain, there are bakers making bread so soft you could nap on it, and you'd kill for even the crumbs. The men around you chew in silence, jaws grinding like rusty hinges. The silence isn't because the food is bad, it's because everyone's tired of talking about the same things. The sea, the wind, how much they hate the food, how much they hate each other. Small talk dies quickly when you're trapped on a wooden box, with the same faces day after day. It's not so different from modern office life, except the HR department here is the captain, and instead of filing a complaint, he can just whip you. Columbus himself strides across the deck, his boots clacking with confidence, his cloak whipping dramatically in the wind. He has that look of someone who always knows he's being watched and enjoys it. The men whisper about him. Some say he's brilliant, others say he's mad. You can't help noticing that madness and brilliance often wear the same hat, especially out here, where the only certainty is uncertainty. Columbus talks a lot about faith, about God guiding the voyage, about destiny. But destiny doesn't fix leaks, and it doesn't make rotten meat taste fresh, so the men's faith is wearing thin. The sailors grumble in their corners, scratching at lice, adjusting ropes, pretending not to notice when Columbus glares in their direction. There's always tension on a ship. The kind of tight, wire energy that makes you think a fight could break out over who gets the last sip of watered down wine. You glance at the ropes, the sails, the barrels lashed to the deck, and wonder if anyone has thought through what happens if this whole wooden contraption decides she's tired of floating. Spoiler: she hasn't been inspected by any maritime safety boards. And then there's the sea itself, always moving, always shifting. Some mornings it's calm, glassy, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Other mornings, it's all claws and teeth, tossing the ship like a child's toy. Today it's somewhere in between. Waves rolling, wind steady, but the kind of steady that makes you suspicious. Sailors trust calm seas about as much as you trust a quiet toddler with a permanent marker. Nothing good follows. By mid-morning, the sun blazes down, and you're sweating through your clothes. The tar in the ropes softens, giving off a smell like burning pitch, sticky and bitter. The men take turns swabbing the deck, hauling ropes, repairing sails. The rhythm of ship life is relentless, a cycle of labor that doesn't care if you're tired or sick. Everyone works, because if you don't, the ship doesn't sail, and if the ship doesn't sail, you're all floating corpses. Simple math. Of course, simple math doesn't stop you from hating it. Hauling ropes in the sun, your back aches, your hands blister, and you start to wonder why you ever signed up for this. Maybe it was the promise of adventure. Maybe it was the chance of gold. Maybe it was just that life on land was equally miserable, but at least out here, you could blame the sea instead of your landlord. Somewhere in the middle of your misery, you notice the gulls. They wheel overhead, mocking you with their freedom. You wonder if they know where land is. You wonder if you could just follow them. Then you remember gulls will eat garbage and still thrive, and you feel a pang of jealousy. The sailors joke about catching one, roasting it, eating it. But deep down, you know it's not really a joke. Hunger makes men think strange things. The ship's boy, barely more than a child, scurries across the deck, carrying buckets of water. His face is sunburned, his hair matted. He looks too small for this world, too fragile. But he works faster than men twice his size. You feel a pang of sympathy, then remember that he's already probably tougher than you'll ever be. Childhood is short when you're raised by the sea. By noon, the crew is restless. The food is worse, the heat oppressive, and Columbus is still talking about glory. Men mutter about turning back. Others mutter about mutiny. The word hangs in the air like smoke. It's not spoken loud, not yet, but it doesn't have to be. You feel it in the way they glance at each other, the way their hands linger on knives. Out here, mutiny isn't just treason. It's survival, depending on who you ask. As you take another bite of wormy hardtack, you can't help thinking about how people centuries from now will complain when their Wi-Fi cuts out for 10 minutes. Imagine trying to explain to them that you crossed an ocean with nothing but stars to guide you, eating bricks of flour and bugs, sleeping beside snoring men who smelled like salted goat. You laugh to yourself, then choke a little on your biscuit. Truly, the comedy writes itself. The afternoon passes in chores and arguments. Someone swears the compass is broken. Someone else swears the water barrels are running low. You watch Columbus, standing tall, his face unreadable, as though he doesn't hear the complaints or doesn't care. Maybe he knows something you don't. Or maybe he's just very good at pretending. Either way, the voyage continues, the sails billowing, the horizon never closer. By evening, the sky turns gold and crimson, the kind of sunset that poets will write about for centuries. The men gather, some praying, some gambling, some staring into the sea like it's a mirror that might tell them the future. You lean against the railing, watching the waves catch the light, and wonder if you'll ever see home again. The thought is sobering. You've already forgotten the smell of your own bed, the sound of your mother's voice, the taste of fresh fruit. Out here, those things feel like dreams you once had. The stars emerge one by one, bright and sharp in the dark sky. The sailors point them out, calling them by names you don't recognize, using them to guide the ship. You realize the ocean isn't empty. It's alive with maps, if you know how to read them. Columbus certainly thinks he does. You hope he's right. Because if he isn't, then you're just another fool lost in an endless sea, praying to stars that don't care if you live or die. And yet, as you watch the constellations rise, You feel something stirring in you. Not faith exactly, but a flicker of wonder. The sea stretches on, mysterious and vast, and though it terrifies you, it also pulls at you. Maybe this is what drives explorers, not gold, not glory, but that ache to know what lies beyond the horizon. You clutch the railing, the salt spray on your face, and for a moment, you feel alive in a way that land never offered. If you think this first day at sea was miserable, just wait until you hear what happens when the wind dies and the ocean itself seems to turn against you. The next morning begins not with the call of gulls or the whisper of waves, but with the silence of nothing. No creak of sails, no slap of rigging, no rhythm of water rushing beneath the hull. You open your eyes and immediately know something is wrong. The air feels too still, too heavy, like the world is holding its breath. When you climb up to the deck, the men are already gathered, their faces tight with unease. The sails hang limp, useless sheets of canvas, drooping like laundry left out on a windless day. The ocean is flat, glassy, stretching to the horizon in all directions. Not a ripple in sight. It's beautiful, in a way, but beauty quickly curdles into dread when you realize that a ship without wind is just a coffin waiting to sink. The sailors mutter, voices low, as if speaking too loudly might scare the wind further away. Superstition is the unofficial fourth ship on this voyage. Always present, always whispering. Some men cross themselves. Others mutter about curses. One man swears he saw a sea serpent during the night, slithering just beyond the ship, its eyes glowing green. No one believes him, but no one laughs either. Out here, laughter feels dangerous. The sun climbs higher, relentless, pounding the deck with heat. The tar softens until it oozes like black syrup between the planks. You can smell it, sharp, acrid, burning your nostrils. Sweat drips down your back, soaking your shirt, plastering it to your skin. The barrels of water are rationed, the cups small. Each sip feels like an insult. You want to drink until your belly sloshes, but instead you tilt your head back and watch as Columbus drinks more freely than the rest, his faith apparently keeping him hydrated. Funny how faith always tastes better when you're in charge of the barrels. By midday, the grumbling starts. Not the usual complaints, but something heavier. A carpenter mutters that this is punishment for daring to sail west. A cook whispers that God himself has abandoned you. You look at the horizon, shimmering in the heat, and for a terrifying moment it seems to bend and vanish, as though the world truly does fall off at the edges. You're told to keep working, though there's nothing to be done. Men swab the deck, coil ropes, scrub the barrels. Chores for the sake of movement, to keep from staring too long at the stillness. The ocean mocks you with its silence. No breeze, no fish. Even the gulls have abandoned you. You wonder if they knew something you didn't. The food doesn't help morale. The salted meat tastes like it's been salted by someone with a personal vendetta against joy. It's tough, stringy, and smells faintly of decay, like old leather left in the rain. You chew until your jaw aches, and wash it down with wine so sour it feels more like vinegar. Some men cut the meat into tiny pieces and pretend it's stew. Others hold their noses and swallow it whole. You wonder if anyone back home would believe that the bravest men on this ship are the ones who eat lunch without gagging. The heat grows unbearable. The deck burns your bare feet if you stand too long in one place. Some men strip to their breeches, their skin turning lobster, red under the sun. You can smell them roasting, a mix of sweat, salt, and sunburn that makes you gag. There's no shade, no escape, just the relentless hammer of sunlight. You try to nap, but the heat suffocates you, pressing down on your chest until you sit up gasping. Sleep becomes another luxury you can't afford. The whispers grow bolder as the day drags on. You hear mutiny mentioned again, this time not in hushed tones but in angry growls. Men curse Columbus openly, calling him a fool, a liar, a man damned by pride. You glance at him. He stands at the bow, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though sheer willpower might summon the wind. You almost admire his stubbornness, but admiration doesn't fill your water cup. At night, the stars burn bright in the black sky, but they bring no comfort. The ocean reflects them, a glittering mirror, making it feel as though you're floating in space, untethered, lost between worlds. The silence is deafening. Every creak of wood, every cough, every sigh is magnified. You close your eyes and imagine you're back on land, lying in grass, listening to crickets. The memory is so sharp it hurts. Days blur together. No wind, no movement, just the same routines repeated until you begin to wonder if time itself has stopped. Men go mad quietly, their eyes hollow, their laughter brittle. One sailor swears he sees land on the horizon, but when you all rush to look, it's gone. Mirage, hallucination, or cruel trick of the light. No one can say. The disappointment cuts deeper than hunger. The ship's boy collapses one afternoon, his small body limp with heat. You watch as the men carry him below. Their faces grim. No one speaks, but you all think the same thing. If the boy doesn't make it, how long before the rest of you follow? You can't bury someone at sea when the ship doesn't move. The thought of a corpse sitting among you in the stifling heat makes your stomach turn. By now, the men don't just grumble about mutiny, they plan it. You overhear them at night, their whispers sharp and urgent. They talk about throwing Columbus overboard, about turning back east, about saving themselves before it's too late. You lie awake, staring at the beams above you, wondering if you'd have the courage, or the madness, to join them. And yet, as dawn breaks on another merciless day, a breeze stirs. Small, almost laughable, but enough to twitch the sails, enough to send a ripple across the water. The men leap to their feet, cheering, their voices hoarse but jubilant. The sails swell, the ropes tighten, the ship groans in relief as she begins to move once more. The wind fills your lungs like a blessing. You've never been more grateful for something so invisible. Columbus stands at the prow, his cloak billowing once again, his face triumphant. He says nothing, but his silence is louder than any speech. The men watch him with new eyes, some with respect, others with resentment. But for now, the ship sails, and the ocean forgives you. You lie back on the deck that night, exhausted, the stars wheeling overhead. You think about how quickly despair can turn to hope, and how quickly hope can vanish again. Out here, moods shift like the tide. You wonder how many more tempests, real or imagined, you'll survive before land finally appears. If you thought the calm sea was maddening, wait until you feel what happens when the ocean decides to wake and tear at the ship with teeth of foam and rage. You wake to thunder. Not the polite kind that rumbles far away like background noise in a summer storm. No, this is the kind that shakes the ship itself, rattling the beams above you like a giant knocking on the roof. For a moment, you think you're dreaming. Then the ship lurches violently, throwing you sideways into the ribs of the man snoring next to you. He wakes with a curse, and suddenly the cramped quarters explode with men scrambling, shouting, cursing. The storm has come. When you reach the deck, the world is chaos. The sky is a wall of black, split by veins of lightning that flash so bright you can see every terrified face around you. Rain slams down in sheets, soaking you to the bone before you've even taken 3 steps. The wind howls like a living thing, shrieking through the rigging, snapping ropes taut. The sails billow, straining like beasts desperate to break free. Every plank, every nail, every rope screams with the effort of holding together. The ocean is unrecognizable. Waves rise like mountains, rolling toward you with white, foaming crests that crash over the deck, drenching everything in icy salt water. The ship pitches violently, nose plunging into one wave only to be hurled up the next. You cling to the railing, your knuckles white, your stomach churning. The horizon disappears, swallowed by walls of water. It feels less like sailing, and more like being tossed inside the mouth of some great beast, spat out only to be swallowed again. The sailors shout commands, voices barely audible over the roar of the storm. Columbus himself stands at the helm, his cloak plastered to him, his face grim but determined. He shouts orders, gesturing to the crew, but the storm swallows his words. Men scramble up the rigging, their bodies whipped by wind, climbing like ants against the fury of the sky. You watch in horror as one loses his grip, sliding, only to catch himself at the last moment. Another isn't so lucky. He vanishes into the sea, swallowed before anyone can even scream his name. The fear is primal, raw, the kind that makes you realize how small you are. Every lightning flash reveals men clinging to ropes, eyes wide, mouths open in prayer or curse. Some cross themselves feverishly, their lips moving faster than the storm itself. Others curse Columbus, curse God, curse the ocean. You taste fear in your mouth, metallic bitter, like iron. You wonder if it's just in your head, or if you've bitten your tongue without realizing. And yet, in the middle of it all, there's a strange exhilaration. Your heart pounds, your blood races. You are alive, more alive than you've ever felt. The storm strips everything down to survival. No gold, no glory, no destiny, just the primal need to cling, to breathe, to endure. You laugh, a wild, breathless sound that surprises even you. The sailor next to you glances at you like you've gone mad, then bursts out laughing too. Maybe madness is the only sane response. Another wave crashes, sweeping across the deck. Barrels break free, rolling, smashing into men's legs. Someone screams. You leap aside, narrowly avoiding one yourself, and slam into the mast. Pain explodes in your shoulder, but you hold on. Better bruised than drowned. You can feel the ship groaning beneath you, every board straining, the sound like bones cracking under pressure. You imagine the hull splintering, the sea rushing in, the ship going down. You see it so vividly you almost believe it's already happening. The storm rages for hours, though time loses meaning. Minutes stretch into eternities, eternities collapse into moments. At some point the wind shifts, catching the sails at the wrong angle, and the ship tilts so sharply you're sure it will roll. Men scream, scrambling, ropes snapping. Somehow, impossibly, she rights herself. You collapse to your knees, panting, tears and rain indistinguishable on your face. By dawn the fury begins to fade. The rain slows to a drizzle, the wind softens. The waves shrink from mountains to hills. The sky lightens to grey, then pale blue. The ship floats battered but afloat, her timbers groaning but unbroken. The men slump on the deck, soaked, exhausted, faces hollow with relief. Columbus stands tall, hands gripping the helm, his eyes blazing. He looks less like a man and more like a prophet who's wrestled with the sea and lived to tell the tale. The dead are counted. Or rather, the missing. 3 men lost, swallowed by the storm. No bodies to bury, just names muttered into the wind, prayers whispered half-heartedly. The ocean doesn't return what it takes. You stare at the water, endless and merciless, and wonder if their souls are drifting somewhere below, forever walking the seabed. The thought chills you more than the rain. Breakfast is silent. The men chew their hardtack and salted meat with blank faces, too tired to complain. The storm has beaten the complaints out of them, at least for now. Even the wine, sour as it is, tastes like a gift after the night you've endured. You swallow greedily, letting the warmth spread through you, as though it could push back the memory of thunder and lightning. You notice how quickly sailors slip into routine again. The storm nearly killed you all, but now ropes must be repaired, sails patched, barrels secured. No time for mourning, no time for reflection. The sea doesn't care about grief, and the ship doesn't sail itself. You join them, your muscles aching, your body bruised, but you work anyway. Survival is the only currency here, and idleness is unforgivable. As the day warms, men begin to laugh again, brittle but real. Someone jokes that the storm was just God sneezing. Another swears he saw the devil dancing on the waves. The laughter grows, nervous at first, then louder, until it almost sounds like joy. Maybe it is joy. Joy at still being alive, joy at still having a ship under your feet. You laugh too, because the alternative is to sit in silence and remember the man you saw vanish into the dark water. That night, the sea is calm again, deceptively gentle, as though nothing had happened. The stars glitter above, serene, indifferent. You lie on the deck, your clothes still damp, your body aching, and watch them. You think about how small you are, how fragile this ship is, how vast the ocean stretches in every direction. And yet, you survived. Somehow, impossibly, you survived. The thought is both comforting and terrifying. If you thought the storm was the worst of it, wait until you feel the creeping dread of weeks without sight of land, when men begin to question not just their captain, but reality itself. The ocean is calm again, but the calm no longer comforts you. It's the kind of calm that feels rehearsed, as if the sea is smirking, waiting for the next opportunity to snap its fingers and remind you who's really in charge. The men work quietly, repairing what the storm broke, ropes frayed, sails torn, barrels cracked. The wood of the ship still groans with every movement, swollen with water, like bones that ache after too much labor. You run your hand over the railing and feel the rough splinters, as if the ship herself has scars now. Columbus, of course, struts across the deck with the air of a man who has just won a personal duel with God. He doesn't say as much, but he doesn't have to. The men look at him differently now. Some with admiration, others with resentment that borders on hatred. You can see it in their eyes, the way they follow him when he moves, the whispers that die when he passes. The storm didn't just test the ship, it tested loyalty. As the days stretch on, a strange rhythm returns. The storm is already fading into story, men exaggerating their bravery, laughing about the way someone screamed when lightning struck close, or how another slipped on the deck and landed flat in a barrel of fish. The sea has a way of turning horror into humor, because if you can't laugh at it, you'll drown in memory alone. But laughter only lasts so long. The horizon is still empty. Morning after morning, you climb the deck, squint into the distance, and see nothing but water. No land, no birds, no drifting branches to hint at a shore. Just water, stretching forever. The endlessness gnaws at you. On land, you measure distance in days of walking, miles of road, towns passed. Out here there's nothing to measure against. The ocean is infinite, and infinity is unbearable. The food doesn't help. The hardtack grows softer, not in a good way, but in the way mold creeps in, green fuzz clinging to corners. You scrape it off with your knife, pretending it makes a difference, then dunk the biscuit in sour wine to soften it. The salted meat, once just tough, now smells rancid, the fat turning slick and grey. You eat anyway. Hunger doesn't care about flavor. The men begin to change. At first, it's small things. Short tempers. Shaving matches that end in laughter but start with real anger. Then the laughter disappears. You hear whispers at night, when you're supposed to be sleeping. Men plotting, voices low but urgent. Some want to turn back. Some say Columbus is leading you all to your deaths. Some swear he's bewitched, guided by demons rather than God. You listen, heart pounding, but you say nothing. Speaking in the dark feels dangerous. Columbus senses it too. His speeches grow longer, louder, more desperate. He talks of faith, of destiny, of glory waiting just beyond the horizon. But the more he speaks, the more you can see the doubt in the men's eyes. Words don't fill empty bellies. Words don't shorten the endless miles of sea. You wonder if he knows it, if his voice trembles just slightly when he raises it against the wind. One evening, the sky burns red with sunset, and for a brief moment, everyone is silent. The colors blaze across the water, crimson and gold, so vivid it feels like the ocean itself is on fire. You lean against the railing, staring, and for the first time in days you feel awe instead of dread. It's beautiful. Terrifying, yes, but beautiful. Then someone mutters that red skies mean blood, and the spell is broken. The men grumble again, mutiny whispering back into their throats. By now, the smallest things spark suspicion. A compass needle wavers, and half the crew insists it's proof the world is ending. A shooting star blazes across the night sky, and another sailor swears it's an omen of death. You watch them with a mix of pity and fear. Superstition is contagious out here, spreading faster than any plague. You catch yourself crossing yourself when the wind groans too loud, or spitting on the deck for luck when someone sneezes. You laugh at yourself afterward, but the laugh is thin. Then comes the morning you wake to shouting, not panic, but excitement. You rush to the deck, heart pounding, and see men pointing at the horizon. Smoke, they cry. Land, they say. You squint until your eyes ache, and yes, you think you see it too. A faint smudge, dark against the endless blue. Relief surges through you. After all this time, after all this fear, Land! But as the hours pass, the smudge doesn't grow closer. In fact, it disappears entirely, swallowed by the haze. Some say it was a mirage. Others say it was hope playing tricks. The disappointment is worse than hunger, worse than exhaustion. Men slump on the deck, silent, eyes hollow. A few weep openly. Even Columbus looks shaken, though he hides it quickly. The sea has a cruel sense of humor. That night, the mood is darker than ever. Men argue, fists flying, knives flashing before others pull them apart. The word mutiny is no longer whispered. It's spoken, blunt and sharp. You feel the tension in every movement, every glance. One spark could set the ship ablaze. Metaphorically, if not literally. You lie in your bunk, staring at the beams above, wondering if you'll wake to a knife at your throat. And yet, even in the darkest moments, absurdity creeps in. One sailor swears his hardtack looks exactly like his mother's face. Another claims the ship's boy is cursed because he whistles too often. Someone else insists that if you sleep with your boots on, the ocean can't take you. You laugh, partly because it's ridiculous, partly because you're terrified it might be true. Out here, reason and madness are neighbors. Days blend again, each one identical to the last. Work, eat, sleep, stare at the horizon. The sameness becomes suffocating, like living in a cage made of sky and sea. You begin to forget what grass feels like under your feet, what fresh fruit tastes like, what silence sounds like without the groan of wood and the slap of waves. The ocean erases memory, replacing it with nothing but itself. And still, Columbus insists you're close. He paces the deck, pointing at birds, at drifting seaweed, at anything that might prove his case. The men grumble, but they watch him, because even doubt needs a leader. You wonder if he believes his own words, or if he's just stubborn enough to keep speaking them until they come true. Either way, the ship sails on, deeper into the unknown. If you thought hunger and storms were the greatest dangers, wait until you hear how suspicion and desperation turn, and against each other in ways the ocean never could. The days stretch like melted wax, slow and sticky, impossible to scrape away. The sea no longer feels like water but like time itself, vast, heavy, unending. You wake, you work, you eat something that barely deserves the name food, and then you stare at the horizon until your eyes burn. Then you do it all again, and again, and again. It's not the storm or the hunger that gnaws at you now. It's the repetition. Men are not meant for eternity. We're meant for villages and roads and doors that lead somewhere new. But here, every step leads to the same place: the railing, the deck, the hold, the hammock. Even the stars at night seem smug, as if they know they're the only landmarks you'll ever get. The crew begins to behave strangely. You catch one man whispering to a pigeon that escaped its cage, stroking its feathers like it's his lover. Another carves notches into the mast, counting something only he understands: days. Prayers? Sins? Columbus strides past without looking, but you can see his jaw tighten. A captain knows when his men are cracking, but he also knows he can't let them see it on his face. Food is worse now. The biscuits crawl with weevils, tiny legs wriggling between crumbs. The trick is not to notice. Dunk it in wine, swallow fast, pretend it's raisins. Some men are too squeamish, picking them out with the tip of a knife, which is pointless because the rest of us just eat them. Protein, someone jokes. You laugh, because it's better than crying. Water is no comfort either. Stored in barrels, it turns stale, then slimy, then alive with things you'd rather not name. You hold your breath when you drink it, pretending the sour tang is just strong wine. Pretending is a skill now, as important as not tying or climbing rigging. Pretend the food is edible. Pretend the voyage has meaning. Pretend land is just beyond the horizon. Pretend the man snoring beside you won't slit your throat if mutiny comes. Arguments flare faster these days. A rope misplaced, a bucket kicked, a glance held too long. Suddenly knives are drawn. Then, just as quickly, laughter covers it. Men clapping each other's backs, saying it was only a joke, no harm meant. But the laughter is sharp, brittle, like glass ready to crack. You sleep with one eye open. And yet, absurdity thrives. One morning you wake to find a sailor has shaved half his beard, insisting it makes him faster, climbing the rigging. Another claims to have seen mermaids in the moonlight, describing them in such detail you almost believe him. The next day, another sailor insists the mermaids were demons. Arguments about fish women become so heated they nearly come to blows. You lean on the railing, shaking your head. Somewhere in the world, real arguments are about crops or cattle or marriages. Here they're about sea monsters with good hair. Columbus watches, always watches. Sometimes he joins the banter, other times he stands apart, hands behind his back, gazing at the horizon, as if trying to will land into existence. His faith hasn't cracked yet, or if it has, he hides it better than the rest. That's what makes him dangerous. Men with unshakable conviction are harder to predict than storms. But even Columbus can't silence the mutiny talk. You hear it at night, voices low, urgent, deadly serious. Men swear they'll turn back, that they'll force the admiral's hand, that they'd rather face shame at home than die in an ocean grave. Others argue that turning back is impossible now, that God himself has ordained this voyage. You lie in your hammock, heart pounding, pretending to sleep, wondering which side you'd choose if the knives came out. One evening, the sun sinks red again, blood on the water. You lean against the rail, listening to the creak of wood and the slap of waves, when a sailor beside you mutters, "Better to drown now than starve later." You don't answer. Some words don't need answering. They just hang in the air, heavy as lead, sinking into the deck itself. The next morning, you wake to shouting. Not excitement this time, not joy, anger. A barrel of fresh water is missing, vanished. Some say it leaked. Others say it was stolen. The crew circles like wolves, eyes darting, fists clenched. Columbus bellows orders, but the men barely listen. You feel the tension rise, sharp as a knife blade. For the first time, you realize mutiny isn't just a whisper. It's a storm waiting to break. And yet, in the midst of fear, you find yourself laughing when one sailor insists the barrel wasn't stolen at all, that it simply walked away. The man swears it. The barrel had legs, he says, thin and spindly like a crab. He saw it scuttle across the deck in the moonlight. Everyone laughs at him, but the laughter is desperate, high-pitched. The kind that hides terror behind teeth. You laugh too, because if you don't, you'll scream. The horizon stays empty. The sky stays blue. The ocean stays endless. Each day is another coin dropped into the slot machine of despair. And yet the ship sails on, driven by wind, by hope, by stubbornness, by the sheer refusal of men to admit they might be wrong. You wonder if that's all this voyage is. Stubbornness stretched into infinity. But stubbornness only holds so long. And when it breaks louder than any storm. If you thought hunger and boredom were the worst enemies, wait until you see how suspicion, envy, and desperation turn shipmates into something far more dangerous than the sea. The ship feels smaller now. It hasn't shrunk, of course, but the walls press closer, the deck narrows, and the hammocks hang lower. Every movement brushes against another body. Every sound cuts through the silence. Privacy doesn't exist, and patience is running thin. Even the sea, wide as eternity, feels like a cage when you can't escape it. The mutiny talk doesn't fade, it grows. You hear it in snatches as you pass groups of sailors, their voices low, words clipped like thieves guarding a secret. Some men swear Columbus is mad, that he'll sail until the world itself ends, the ships dropping off the edge into the mouth of some cosmic beast. Others say he's bewitched, guided by devils who laugh at human suffering. A few mutter that if they slit his throat in the night, no one back in Spain would ever know. You try to ignore it, but it's impossible. Once the word mutiny enters the air, it never leaves. It hangs over the deck like mist, seeping into every conversation, every glance. You notice men watching Columbus with narrowed eyes, hands resting too casually on their knives. You notice others watching those men, perhaps ready to betray them if it means survival. Trust is gone. Columbus feels it too. His speeches are louder now, filled with fire and destiny. He points at drifting seaweed as proof that land must be near. He lifts his arms toward the heavens, declaring that God himself guides their course. But you see the way his eyes flick toward the men as he speaks, searching their faces, measuring the danger. Words are weapons now, and he wields them with desperation. And still, the horizon remains empty. Each dawn brings the same crushing disappointment, water stretching forever, sky that refuses to change. Some men begin to doubt their own senses. One swears he saw a bird flying west, then curses himself when no one else does. Another insists he smelled fresh grass, though the nearest blade is thousands of miles away. You begin to wonder if your own mind is slipping, if the sea itself is whispering lies into your ears. The food dwindles, salted meat grows slimy, crawling with maggots. You eat it anyway. Hunger erases disgust, though not shame. Hardtack crumbles into powder, the taste of mold clinging to your tongue long after you swallow. Even the rats grow thin, bold enough to scurry across sleeping bodies in search of crumbs. You've never envied a rat before, but now you do. At least they have something to chew. Sleep brings no rest. Hammocks sway in endless rhythm, creaking ropes louder than lullabies. Men mutter in their dreams, some crying out, others grinding teeth. You wake with your heart racing, unsure if it's the rocking of the ship, or the weight of dread pressing on your chest. The air in the hold grows sour with sweat and sickness. You climb to the deck for relief, only to find the stars staring down like watchful eyes, pitiless and eternal. The smallest things spark fury now. A stolen sip of wine, a miscounted ration, a shove too hard during work. You watch one man strike another with a belaying pin, blood spraying across the deck. The fight ends quickly, the attacker restrained, but the damage is deeper than wounds. Violence is no longer a threat, it's a promise. And then comes the night when whispers turn to shouts. You wake to the sound of feet pounding the deck, voices raised, knives flashing in the lantern light. Men gather around Columbus, shouting, demanding answers. They accuse him of betrayal, of leading them into nothingness, of condemning them all to death. The air crackles with danger. One wrong word, one wrong move, and blood will stain the planks. Columbus doesn't flinch. He steps forward, his face lit by the swaying lanterns, his voice steady as steel. He swears land is near, days away, hours even. He promises gold, glory, eternal fame. He speaks with the conviction of a man who believes, or at least convinces others he does. For a moment, the men falter. Their rage doesn't vanish, but it wavers, uncertain. You stand at the edge of the circle, heart hammering, watching history teeter on a knife's edge. Part of you hopes the men succeed, that they turn back, that you'll see Spain again. Another part knows there's no turning back. You've come too far. The sea won't let you go so easily. The mutiny doesn't happen that night. Columbus holds the line, just barely. The men grumble, curse, spit, but they return to their hammocks, though none truly sleep. The air is thick with tension, heavier than storm clouds. You know it's only a matter of time before the breaking point comes. And yet, even as fear coils tighter, absurdity clings like barnacles. One sailor, drunk on sour wine, insists he's figured out how to talk to fish. He kneels at the rail, whisper into the water, waiting for answers. Another ties feathers to his arms and leaps from a crate, insisting he's practicing for the flight home. The men laugh, but the laughter is cracked, desperate, the sound of men trying to keep madness at bay. You realize something then, standing in the half, light of lanterns and stars. The sea doesn't just test the body, it tests the mind. And the mind, unlike the body, doesn't always heal. Some will never step on land again without hearing whispers in the waves. Some will never trust silence, or sleep, or the simple sight of the horizon. The ocean keeps its scars invisible, but deep. If you thought mutiny was the worst fate, wait until you feel the moment when land finally appears. Because after so much suffering, nothing looks the way you expect. The first sign is so small you almost miss it. A feather drifting across the deck, carried on a breeze that doesn't smell like the ocean. You pick it up, turn it over in your hand, and for a moment you think it's nothing. A bird could have flown from anywhere. But when you hold it up to the light, the men around you fall silent. It's not just a feather, it's a promise. The whispers start immediately. Some say it means land is near. Others scoff, saying it could have floated from a bird miles away, lost at sea just like them. But even the scoffers can't hide the spark in their eyes. After weeks of despair, the smallest sign is enough to ignite hope. Soon, there are more signs. Bits of branches drifting in the water, leaves still green, as if they were plucked yesterday. A bird circles overhead, its wings slicing the sky like a blade. You watch the men's faces as they follow it, necks craned, eyes shining. They look like children again, daring to believe in miracles. Columbus seizes the moment. He stands tall at the rail, voice booming with triumph. He declares these are omens, proof that God has guided them true. His words wash over the men like wine, warming them, numbing their doubts. For the first time in weeks, you hear laughter that isn't brittle. You hear songs, voices rising into the night, carrying hope across the water. But hope is dangerous. It sharpens hunger into frenzy. Men crowd the deck, staring at the horizon until their eyes ache, desperate to see what they've dreamed of. Every ripple becomes a shoreline, every shadow a mountain. Some claim they smell grass, others swear they hear the call of animals. You sniff the air, taste the breeze, and for the first time it doesn't taste like salt alone. Something else is there. Sweetness, faint but undeniable. That night, no one sleeps. The ship is alive with expectation. Men pace the deck, muttering prayers, clenching their fists as if holding land already. You lie in your hammock, eyes wide, listening to the creak of wood and the restless shifting of bodies. Even the rats seem restless, scurrying faster, sensing something in the air. Then, in the darkness before dawn, a cry shatters the night. A lookout's voice, shrill with disbelief and joy. Land! Land! The ship erupts. Men scramble to the deck, pushing, shouting, weeping. You rush with them, heart hammering, and there it is, faint, hazy but real. A line against the horizon, darker than sea, steadier than clouds. Land. The sight steals your breath. After weeks of endless blue, the green smudge is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Men fall to their knees, crossing themselves, sobbing openly. Some embrace, others shout so loudly their voices crack. Columbus stands apart, face illuminated by dawn, eyes blazing with vindication. For him it's not just land, it's glory. But as the sun rises, sharpening the view, unease creeps in. The land looks wild, untouched, nothing like the golden cities Columbus promised. No towers gleam, no ships wait in the harbor, no smoke rises from grand hearths. Just trees, thick and unyielding, stretching to the sky. The men don't notice, not yet, but you do. The dream doesn't match the picture that was painted. Approaching shore takes hours. The sails fill, the ship cuts through the water, the green line growing larger, sharper. The men crowd the rail, gripping it so hard their knuckles whiten. Some reach out as if they could touch it already. You feel the same madness, the same need to be off this cursed ship, to set foot on solid ground no matter what waits there. When the anchor finally drops, the men cheer louder than any storm. Boats are lowered, bodies crammed inside, oars splashing frantically. You climb in with them, heart racing, the smell of earth growing stronger with each stroke. It's intoxicating. Damp soil, fresh leaves. The promise of life that isn't salted or spoiled. The moment your feet touch sand, you nearly collapse. The ground is solid, unyielding, blessedly still. You kneel, pressing your hands into it, feeling grit between your fingers, tears stinging your eyes. Around you, men fall to their knees, kissing the earth, laughing, sobbing, clinging to each other. Some dig their fingers into the soil and clutch it like treasure. Columbus strides ashore last, flag in hand, chest puffed like a rooster. He plants it in the sand with a flourish, declaring the land for Spain, for God, for himself. The men cheer again, though their voices are hoarse, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. You cheer too, though your throat aches, because what else can you do? History demands it. But even as triumph echoes, a strange silence follows. The jungle looms thick and impenetrable, shadows shifting between the trees. Birds cry out, unfamiliar and piercing, unlike any song you've ever heard. The air hums with insects, bites already stinging your skin. The land is beautiful, yes, but it's also alive in ways the ocean never was. It watches you. It waits. You glance at the men around you. They're drunk on relief, giddy with survival, blind to danger, but you feel it in your bones. The sea may have tried to break you, but the land has plans of its own. If you thought surviving the voyage was the hardest part, wait until you step deeper into this new world, where every tree hides eyes, and every shadow holds secrets. The earth feels almost too solid beneath your feet. After weeks of rocking hammocks and tilting decks, your legs don't quite remember how to trust ground that doesn't move. You stumble as you walk, laughing nervously with the others, though the laughter sounds cracked, like glass ready to shatter. One man falls outright, face first into the sand, and when he lifts his head, grinning with dirt between his teeth, the crew erupts in cheers as though he's just conquered the continent. But the longer you stay, the more the land reveals itself. The trees aren't gentle. They tower, thick trunks knotted with vines, branches woven into a green ceiling that blocks out the sky. The air is heavy, wetter than the sea breeze, clinging to your skin, filling your lungs. Every breath tastes of leaves and earth and something sharp, like spice left too long in a jar. You swat at insects you can't even see, tiny needles pricking your skin. Already, your neck itches, your ankles burn. The sound is worst of all. The forest is alive with shrieks and calls, animal voices you can't name. Some echo like laughter, high and mocking. Others rumble low, like growls from throats too large to imagine. Birds dart overhead, their feathers bright as jewels, their wings slicing the air. For a moment, it feels like stepping into a dream. But dreams have a way of curdling into nightmares when you stay too long. Columbus wastes no time. He thrusts his flag into the soil again, as if the earth itself needs reminding of who owns it now. He declares it all in the name of Spain, voice booming with triumph, though the jungle doesn't seem impressed. The men cheer, but the cheers are thinner this time, swallowed quickly by the trees. You notice some of them glancing into the shadows, gripping their knives. The ocean was merciless, yes, but at least it was open. This new world has too many places for danger to hide. Exploration begins clumsily. Men hack at the undergrowth with swords and axes, sweat soaking their clothes within minutes. Every step forward feels like trespassing. The ground squelches underfoot, damp and strange. Strange fruits dangle from branches, colors too bright, shapes too unfamiliar. Some men reach for them eagerly, but others slap their hands away. No one knows if they're food or poison, salvation or death. Thirst drives a few to search for fresh water. They stumble upon a stream, bubbling clear and cold. They drink greedily, laughing as it runs down their chins. You kneel with them, scoop it into your mouth, and nearly weep at the taste. After weeks of sour barrels and stale slime, this water is liquid heaven. For a moment you forget fear, forget exhaustion. Forget everything but the sweetness of life sliding down your throat. But even joy has its shadow. One sailor, grinning with water dripping from his beard, suddenly stiffens. His smile falters. He clutches his stomach. Within moments, he collapses, retching violently. The others recoil, faces pale. The laughter dies. You watch, horrified, as the man writhes in the mud, his cries echoing through the trees. Whether it was the water, the fruit he sneaked earlier, or simply the toll of the voyage catching up, no one knows. But the forest feels darker now, as if it has claimed its first toll. Nightfall brings no peace. The jungle doesn't sleep. It hisses, buzzes, howls. Shadows flicker between the trees, moving in ways that don't belong to wind alone. The men huddle around a fire, its smoke curling upward, the only barrier between them and the dark. Stories begin, whispered and shaky. Tales of monsters, of demons, of gods that guard the land. Columbus listens, his jaw set, refusing to let fear take root. But you see it in his eyes when he thinks no one's looking. He fears too. Around the fire, the humor that kept men sane at sea sputters into life again. One sailor insists the insects, buzzing around, are spies, sent by the forest to report their every move. Another jokes that the trees themselves are listening, leaning closer when you speak too loud. The laughter comes, but it's nervous, sharp. No one dares look too long into the dark. Sleep is shallow, restless. The ground is uneven, damp, crawling with unseen things. You wake with bites on your arms, welts rising like angry blisters. You swat at the air, cursing softly, only to hear something stir in the undergrowth nearby. Eyes glint in the firelight, low, animal unblinking. You freeze, heart hammering, until the creature slips back into shadow. You never see what it was, and that's worse than seeing. Dawn brings relief, though not safety. The forest is brighter, yes, but also louder, alive with shrieks and calls that make the hair on your neck rise. Columbus orders deeper exploration, his hunger for discovery outweighing the men's dread. You march forward, blades hacking, sweat pouring, every step a gamble. Strange flowers bloom in impossible colors, their petals wide as shields. The scent is intoxicating, sweet and rotting all at once. One sailor leans too close, inhaling deeply, and collapses moments later, his skin slick with sweat. The others drag him back, muttering prayers. The land gives, but it also punishes. As you push farther, the signs appear. Footprints in the mud, broken branches, smoke curling faintly in the distance. The realization crashes over you. You are not alone. The forest is watching, not just with animals' eyes, but with human ones. You feel the weight of it pressing on your skin, the certainty that every step is being marked, every voice noted. Columbus's eyes blaze. This is what he's wanted. The proof of people, of riches, of kingdoms waiting to be discovered. The men murmur nervously, torn between awe and fear. You feel your stomach knot. Discovery is a word that tastes sweet in Columbus's mouth, but to those who already live here, it might mean something else entirely. The forest breathes around you, alive with secrets, and you know the voyage isn't over. The ocean tried to break you, but the land is only beginning to test its teeth. If you thought the sea was merciless, wait until you see what happens when strangers meet in a world neither side understands. You wake to the sound of voices that are not your own. At first, you think you're still dreaming. Low murmurs, rhythmic, almost like a chant. The fire from last night smolders near your feet, grey smoke twisting upward, and beyond it, shadows move. You sit up too fast, your head pounding from too little sleep and too much fear, and you see them. They are watching you. They have been watching for some time. At the edge of the clearing, half Hidden among the trees, stand men whose skin glows a deep copper in the early sun. Their hair is dark, some tied back with cords, some hanging long and loose. They carry long shafts, spears, perhaps, though their points glint less like iron and more like sharpened bone or stone. They make no move to attack, only to stand, to stare, their expressions unreadable. And in that moment you realize the entire voyage, the storms, the hunger, the endless sea, has been leading to this, the moment when two worlds look each other in the eye and try to decide if they are friend or enemy. Columbus rises from his place with the grace of a man who has rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. He smooths his cloak, lifts his chin, and steps forward as though the ground belongs to him already. He raises a hand, palm open, in what he surely believes is a universal sign of peace. The strangers murmur to one another. Their language is quick, melodic, filled with sounds that dance on the tongue. You cannot understand a word, but it doesn't matter. The tone says everything. They are curious, suspicious, perhaps amused. One of the sailors behind you mutters that they look like children, smaller and slimmer than the crew, their bodies bare save for ornaments of shell and feather. Another whispers that such ornaments must be tokens of sorcery, protection against the strangers who have just tumbled from the sea. You roll your eyes. Only yesterday this man was terrified of cabbages rolling out of the storage barrels, convinced they were plotting against him. Fear makes fools of everyone. Columbus bows slightly, the motion stiff, like a man unaccustomed to lowering himself. He gestures toward his chest and speaks his name slowly, as if volume and clarity might bridge a chasm of languages. Cristobal Cone, he says, striking his breast. Espy. He sweeps his hand toward the horizon, where the ships sit anchored like great beasts in the water. The strangers follow his hand, their eyes widening at the sight of the towering wooden hulks. They murmur again, this time louder, some with awe, others with what might be laughter. You imagine how it must look, 3 enormous wooden monsters crouched on the sea, sails furled, masts stabbing the sky. To you, they are creaking, familiar prisons. To these people, they might as well be dragons. One of the strangers steps forward, bolder than the rest. He is tall for his people, his chest painted with streaks of white clay, his hair adorned with feathers that glint in the light. He points at Columbus, then at the ships, then at you, as though asking what sort of creatures you are. Columbus beams, delighted, and immediately launches into an oration that not a single soul outside his crew understands. He speaks of Spain, of God, of glory, his words rich and rolling, but to the strangers it must sound like the squawking of some oversized bird. Still, his confidence is unshaken. Columbus has never let comprehension get in the way of self-importance. The tall man speaks back, his voice steady, eyes sharp, but the words tumble past you like water. You watch his mouth move, his hands gesture, and realize that meaning is being hurled across a void with no bridge. And yet, somehow, both sides persist, convinced communication is within reach. Humans, after all, are stubborn animals. We'd rather invent meaning than admit ignorance. Then comes the moment of exchange. Columbus reaches into a pouch at his side and withdraws a trinket, a bead of polished glass, blue as the sea. He holds it up, letting the sun catch its shine, then offers it forward. The strangers lean in, their eyes wide. The tall man accepts it gingerly, turning it between his fingers, lifting it to his ear, even biting it lightly with his teeth. He nods, mutters to the others, and the group erupts in murmurs of wonder. You almost laugh. Weeks at sea, the world nearly lost behind you, and here stands a man marveling at a bead the way a child might marvel at a toy. And yet, are you any different? Not 2 nights ago, you would have sold your soul for a handful of figs or a jug of clean water. People are people, and what dazzles us is often laughably small. The exchange continues. More beads, tiny bells, bits of colored cloth are produced from the sailors' pouches. In return, the strangers offer parrots with feathers blazing green, and red, woven baskets that smell faintly of herbs, and small nuggets of what looks unmistakably like gold. At the sight of that gleaming metal, Columbus's eyes all but ignite. He takes it reverently, holds it aloft for his men to see, and you feel the mood shift instantly. Curiosity is one thing, gold is another. The sailors murmur among themselves, excitement bubbling. Some clutch their rosaries, whispering prayers of gratitude. Others grin like wolves scenting prey. You feel a knot tighten in your stomach. Wonder can coexist with caution. But greed has a way of burning everything else away. As the sun climbs higher, more of the strangers appear from the trees. Men, women, even children. Their bodies painted, adorned with shells and feathers, their eyes shining with curiosity. They touch the sailors' clothes, tug at their beards, laugh at their pale skin. One woman points at a sailor's boots, and then at his bare feet, giggling when he lifts the boot to show it off. Another runs her fingers along a sword's hilt, then jerks back in alarm when the blade gleams. The sailors bask in the attention. After weeks of filth and misery, to be regarded with awe is intoxicating. They puff out their chests, strut like roosters, exaggerating their gestures, basking in the children's laughter. You can't help but smirk. Grown men, hardened by storms and hunger, reduced to fools by a few admiring eyes. If mirrors existed here, half of them would preen until nightfall. Food is shared. Strange fruits are offered, round, sweet, dripping with juice that runs down your chin. You devour them greedily, not caring whether they'll kill you later. Compared to the maggot-ridden biscuits of the voyage, this is ambrosia. Columbus eats delicately, as though performing for a royal court, but his men gorge themselves until their bellies ache. One sailor attempts to pocket more for later, but the fruit squashes instantly, oozing sticky pulp that drips through his fingers. The locals laugh, a sound so warm and genuine it makes you blush on his behalf. The afternoon wears on with cautious wonder. Yet beneath it, unease simmers. Some sailors whisper that the strangers' smiles are too wide, their generosity too easy. Others mutter that these people seem defenseless, ripe for conquest. You glance at Columbus and see the calculations in his eyes. He sees not people, but subjects, not gifts, but resources. His gaze lingers too long on the gold, too sharp on the land stretching endlessly beyond. Still, for now, there is peace. Children sit on sailors' laps, parrots squawk on shoulders, and laughter stitches the two groups together. You almost forget the hunger, the storms, the mutiny whispered in the dark. Almost. As the sun dips, the strangers begin to retreat, one by one slipping back into the trees. The tall man with painted chest lingers longest, clasping Columbus's hand in a grip that seems to carry both warmth and warning. He says something, slow, deliberate, heavy with meaning, but the words vanish into the void between languages. Columbus smiles, nods, and presses a final bead into the man's palm. The man glances at it, then at Columbus, and for the first time his expression falters. Not awe. Not amusement. Something else. Something you cannot name. Then he turns and disappears into the forest, leaving you with the sound of crickets rising in the dusk. The sailors chatter excitedly, recounting every laugh, every gift, every gesture as though they've been blessed by saints. Columbus says little, staring instead at the glittering nugget of gold in his hand. He turns it over and over, as if the metal itself is whispering secrets only he can hear. You watch him, and for the first time, you realize that whatever friendship blossomed today will not last long. Gold has entered the story, and gold does not share the stage kindly. That night, as you lie on the damp earth, the memory of painted faces and melodic voices lingers. You replay the laughter, the fruit, the touch of curious hands. You also remember the weight of those watching eyes, the unspoken questions hanging between you. Two worlds have met, but they do not yet understand what that means. Sleep comes slowly, tangled with unease. Somewhere in the dark, an owl calls, low and mournful, and you shiver despite the heat. For the first time, you wonder not if you will survive the voyage, but whether you will survive what comes after. And if you thought the sea was cruel, wait until you see what greed does when it walks on land with a smile. The morning after the first meeting, the beach feels different. The sand is the same, the jungle still hums with life, but there's a weight in the air, a subtle shift in the way the men move, in the way they speak. It's as if the entire crew has tasted something new, possibility, power, gold, and now the hunger gnaws more fiercely than the ocean ever did. Columbus walks with a swagger that wasn't there before, his eyes scanning the tree line not for friends, but for fortune. He clutches that small piece of gold like a relic, as if it alone proves God's favor rests on him. The sailors chatter in knots, voices buzzing with excitement. They describe the locals over and over, their ornaments, their bare skin, their painted faces. Some speak with admiration, others with derision. But beneath both lies the same question: how much can we take from them? You hear it in the tone, sharp as a hook hidden in bait. Yesterday, they were guests. Today, they are hunters sniffing for prey. The strangers return cautious at first, then more boldly as they recognize the crew still lingers. They bring more gifts: bright feathers, woven mats, fruit heavy with juice. One carries another small glint of gold, hammered crudely into the shape of a disc, worn around his neck as though it's nothing more than decoration. The sailor's eyes latch onto it like wolves on a lamb. Columbus steps forward, voice honeyed, gestures grand. He offers beads and bells again, and the man accepts politely, but when Columbus reaches for the golden ornament, the stranger hesitates. His hand lingers at his chest, fingers brushing the disc, eyes narrowing. For the first time, you see the warmth in their faces falter. But Columbus insists. His voice rises, his hand gestures larger, and he plucks the ornament free with a laugh that doesn't quite mask the force behind it. He turns to the crew, raising the disc high, and the men cheer, their hunger stoked. The stranger steps back, silent, his eyes fixed not on Columbus, but on the ornament now dangling in another man's hand. There's no violence, no words of anger, but you feel it in the air. Something delicate has cracked. Later, when the locals leave, the sailors explode with excitement. If one man carries gold casually around his neck, how much more must there be hidden in the land? They speculate wildly. Veins of gold running under the mountains, villages lined with golden idols, rivers glittering with dust. Columbus fans the flames, promising riches beyond imagination, glory for Spain, eternal names in history. He speaks like a prophet, but you know prophets can lead men into deserts as easily as they lead them to salvation. That night, around the fire, the men argue over who will claim what. Some already divide spoils they don't yet own. Others whisper darker thoughts. That the locals are too trusting, too naive, and it would be the simplest thing in the world to seize what they want. You lie awake, listening to the mutters, feeling the shift in their hearts. Yesterday, these men marveled at parrots and fruit. Today they dream of chains and conquest. In the days that follow, the meetings multiply. More locals appear, curious, bringing gifts, watching with open eyes. The children laugh at the sailors' strange clothes. The women giggle at their beards. The men gesture and speak in quick streams of words no one understands. At times, it feels almost like friendship, sharing food, laughter bridging the chasm of language. But beneath it, the hunger grows. The sailors begin to demand more gold. They point at ornaments, at small beads woven into necklaces, gesturing insistently. Some of the locals oblige, offering what little they wear, bemused by the obsession. Others grow wary, their smiles thinner, their gestures more guarded. You see them exchange glances when Columbus presses too hard, hear the quick murmurs when sailors grab too eagerly. The warmth is cooling, the air stiffening. Then comes the sickness. One sailor, pale and sweating, collapses on the beach. He moans through the night, his body racked with fever, his skin blotched and trembling. At first, you think it's the voyage catching up with him. The foul water, the rot in the biscuits. But soon more men fall ill. A cough here, a rash there, fevers spreading like fire through dry straw. The crew mutters darkly, blaming the land, the fruit, even the locals themselves. Some whisper of curses of spirits offended by their arrival. But sickness is not one-sided. A few days later, you notice a child among the locals coughing, his small chest heaving with effort. Another scratches at a rash blooming across her arms. You realize with a jolt that the sickness may not be theirs, but yours. An invisible plague carried across the ocean, spilling into this untouched world. You see the unease in the locals' eyes, the way they hold their children closer, the hesitation when they approach the sailors now. The laughter is rarer, the distance greater. Columbus, of course, refuses to see weakness. He speaks of destiny, of God's will, of trials meant to strengthen their mission. He points at the gold and declares it worth any price. You want to shake him, to shout that price will not be his alone to pay. But your voice would vanish into the roar of his ambition. Men do not hear warnings when their ears are full of dreams. One afternoon, a misunderstanding sparks like flint against steel. A sailor, desperate for more gold, seizes a small ornament from a woman's arm. She cries out, pulling back, her face twisted in alarm. The other locals react instantly, stepping forward, voices sharp, gestures angry. The sailor panics, draws his knife, and for a heartbeat the entire world holds its breath. Columbus rushes in, spreading his arms, booming his voice in false calm, forcing the sailor to lower his blade. The tension lingers like smoke, heavy and choking, until the locals retreat, their faces closed. That night, the beach is quieter than it has ever been. No laughter drifts from the tree line. No gifts are brought. The sailors mutter nervously, but Columbus smiles, claiming this is only a pause, a test of their resolve. He speaks of building a fort, of establishing a foothold, of planting Spain's banner in the soil. His words ring with certainty, but in the silence of the forest, you feel only dread. Days pass and the visits grow fewer. When the locals come, they bring less. Fewer fruits, no gold. Their eyes dart, their smiles forced. The sailors grumble, frustration simmering. Columbus orders scouting parties deeper inland, searching for villages, for mines, for anything that glitters. You march with them, hacking through jungle, sweat stinging your eyes, the air thick with insects. You see signs of habitation, footprints, smoke in the distance. But the locals melt into the trees, watching, always watching, but refusing to meet you openly. The men grow restless, their nerves fraying. Some whisper that the locals are planning revenge, others that they are hiding hoards of gold, taunting the sailors with scraps. Columbus tightens his grip, his commands harsher, his temper shorter. He demands obedience, demands faith, demands patience. Even as he himself grows thinner, his eyes fever bright. One night, as the fire flickers low, you hear the sound of drums in the distance. Low, steady, rising and falling like the heartbeat of the forest. The sailors stiffen, muttering prayers, clutching their weapons. Columbus declares it a welcome, a celebration, but his smile doesn't reach his eyes. The drums go on for hours, echoing through the trees, until sleep becomes impossible and fear sits heavy on every chest. The next day, fewer locals appear than ever before. Those who do keep their distance, speaking quickly, gesturing sharply, as though warning you of something. Columbus, impatient, dismisses them, focusing instead on the glint of gold one man still wears. He cannot see what you see. The fear in their faces, the sickness in their children, the cracks widening with every meeting. He sees only metal, and metal has blinded better men than him. You feel it building, the way storms build at sea. The stillness, the heaviness, the charge in the air that warns of what's coming. Two worlds have touched, but they do not fit. Curiosity has soared, laughter has thinned, and greed has sharpened. You lie awake that night, staring at the stars, and wonder if you are witnessing the birth of something, or the beginning of its destruction. And if you thought the sea was cruel, wait until you see how quickly trust can rot on land. The drums had stopped, but the silence they left behind was worse. It pressed into your ears, thick and waiting, like the pause before thunder. The sailors still muttered about curses and sorcery, but they had grown tired of their own fear. Men can only shiver so long before they start wanting something to strike. Columbus, never one to rest in stillness, turned the unease into orders. He wanted something permanent, something to plant in the soil and say, "Here we remain." And so the building began. The first timbers hacked down from the jungle, their sap sticky on your hands, the smell sharp and sweet like honey rotting in the sun. The men grumbled. After weeks at sea and days of stumbling through undergrowth, they had hoped for rest, not more labor. But Columbus's voice carried the weight of both God and king, and no one dared ignore it. You swung axes until your arms burned, dragged logs through muck that sucked at your boots, hammered crude stakes into the ground. The beginnings of a fort rose slowly on the beach, a skeleton of wood that looked more like desperation than strength. To the men, it was a promise of safety. To the locals who drifted by to watch, their eyes narrowed and their arms folded, it must have looked like a cage sprouting where none had belonged. At first, they laughed, pointing at the clumsy walls, speaking quickly among themselves. You could almost hear the joke in their voices, these pale men building fences against the forest itself. But the laughter faded as the walls grew higher, sharper, less like a curiosity and more like a claim. Columbus called it progress. You called it painting a target. Food was still a daily struggle. The fruit that once seemed abundant became scarcer, as though the forest had grown stingy, or the locals had chosen not to share. Fish caught in the shallows offered some relief, though they tasted of mud and left bones splintering between your teeth. Every meal was thin, every stomach never quite full. Men grew leaner, their tempers sharper. It was in this hunger that the first spark flared. A group of sailors, sent inland to forage, returned with nothing but scratches and wild tales of villages glimpsed in the distance. They claimed the locals had food in abundance. Fields of maize, baskets of fruit, meat smoking over fires. But when they approached, the people had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only footprints. Columbus listened, his jaw tightening, his eyes hard. To him this was not avoidance. It was defiance. The next day more locals appeared on the beach, but they came without gifts. Their hands were empty, their faces solemn. They watched the fort rise, their silence heavy, broken only by a few sharp words exchanged with Columbus. No one understood the language, but the meaning was clear enough. They were no longer amused. Still, the sailors pressed closer, gesturing for food, for gold, for anything. When nothing was offered, one sailor grew impatient. He reached for a basket slung across a woman's shoulder, pulling it open to reveal fruit. She cried out, pulling back, and the basket spilled across the sand. Columbus barked at the man to stand down, but the damage was done. The locals' eyes flashed, their voices rose, and they turned as one, retreating into the jungle without a backward glance. The sailors cursed, furious at losing both food and face. Columbus raged at the man who had grabbed the basket, though you noticed he did not order punishment. After all, hunger excuses many sins in a leader's eyes, especially when his own stomach growls. That night, the firelight flickered across grim faces. The men whispered about taking what they needed, about raiding the villages they had glimpsed. Columbus did not say yes, but he did not say no. His silence was a door left open, and the men's imaginations rushed through it. The following days blurred into unease. The locals came less often, always in smaller groups, always keeping their distance. Their smiles, once bright, now seemed thin, forced. The children no longer laughed at sailors' beards or boots. The parrots, the ornaments, the gifts gone. In their place only wary eyes and curt gestures. The sailors grew restless, pacing like dogs at the end of a chain. Columbus urged patience, but you could see the twitch in his jaw, the hunger in his gaze. It was not patience that broke the stalemate, but sickness. Another sailor collapsed, his body racked with fever, his cough wet and rattling. Soon after, two locals appeared with the same symptoms, eyes sunken, skin blotched, their voices hoarse. They stayed only a short while, then vanished into the forest, leaving behind a silence more ominous than drums. The realization spread slowly, like rot through wood. Whatever plagued the sailors was seeping into the people as well. You saw the unease in both camps. The sailors whispered of curses, the locals began to stay away entirely. For a few days, the beach was empty save for your own wary crew, and the skeleton of the fort rising higher. Then, one morning, a band of locals appeared again. But not with fruit, not with gifts. They came with spears in their hands. They stood at the tree line, not advancing, not retreating. But their faces painted, their bodies taut with readiness. The sailors froze, their hands inching toward weapons, their eyes darting to Columbus. He stepped forward, arms spread, his voice booming with what he thought was calm authority. He gestured, he pleaded, he offered trinkets from his pouch. The locals did not move. For long minutes the two groups faced one another, the air thick enough to choke. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the locals melted back into the forest, leaving only footprints in the sand. The sailors exiled as though they had been holding their breath for hours. Columbus declared it a test, a bluff, nothing more. But you saw the way his hand trembled as he lowered it, the way his eyes darted to the fort's unfinished walls. That night, the men sharpened their blades in silence. No one told jokes, no one sang. The fire crackled, the jungle hummed, and all you heard was the scrape of metal on stone. The next day, Columbus sent out another scouting party. You went with them, trudging inland through heat that pressed like a wet cloth against your skin. The forest swallowed you whole, the sounds of birds and insects constant, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and flowers that reeked of sweetness gone sour. After hours of slogging, you found it a village, simple huts clustered around a clearing, smoke rising from dying fires. But it was empty, not a soul remained. The sailors rifled through what little was left. Baskets, tools, scraps of food. They stuffed what they could into their packs, muttering about cowardice, about savages fleeing before real men. You said nothing. To you the silence of the village was louder than any battle cry. The people had chosen to vanish rather than meet you. That, you thought, spoke more powerfully than spears. You returned to the beach with your stolen spoils. Columbus praised the discovery, praised the supplies, praised the proof of habitation. But in his eyes you saw frustration. He wanted the people, not their empty homes. He wanted subjects, not shadows. The days grew heavier. More sickness spread among the crew, fevers and coughs wearing men thin. The food never seemed enough. The fort's walls stood taller now, casting long shadows on the sand. But they felt less like protection, and more like prison bars. The sailors muttered in dark corners, their patience unraveling thread by thread. And then, one night, the forest erupted with sound. Shouts, drums, the crack of branches. The sailors leapt to their feet, weapons drawn, hearts pounding. From the tree line, shadows surged, figures painted, armed with spears, their voices rising in fierce cries. The first stones hurled, clattering against the wooden walls. A spear thudded into the sand. The sailors shouted back, some loosing crossbow bolts blindly into the dark. The night became chaos, firelight flickering on faces twisted in fear and rage. It did not last long. After a flurry of cries, the shadows retreated, melting back into the forest as swiftly as they had come. The beach was littered with stones, a few broken spears, and the stench of fear. No blood spilled, no bodies left behind. But the message was clear: the welcome was over. The sailors shouted, cursing, demanding retaliation. Columbus, his face pale but his voice steady, declared it a skirmish, nothing more, a test of resolve. He promised they would prevail, that God was on their side, that the land was theirs by right. But you saw the doubt flicker in his eyes, the way he stared into the trees, as if they were closing in. Sleep that night was impossible. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps, every crack of branch like a spear drawn. You lay awake, staring at the half-built walls of the fort, and wondered not if the locals would return, but when. And if you thought the ocean was merciless, wait until you see how quickly a paradise can become a battlefield. The night after the skirmish left you with eyes that refused to shut. Every time your lids grew heavy, a crackle from the tree line jolted you awake, certain that painted figures were crouched in the shadows, waiting to strike. Even the crickets sounded hostile, their chirps sharp as arrows. When dawn came, it felt less like relief, and more like the beginning of another test. Another day of nerves stretched thin as rope. The men stirred sluggishly, dark circles beneath their eyes, their movements heavy. No one sang. No one joked. Even the most boisterous sailor kept his voice low, as though afraid to disturb something lurking just out of sight. The fort's rough walls, once raised with pride, now seemed flimsy, the gaps between logs wide enough for fear to slip through. Columbus strutted among the men, barking encouragement, but his face was drawn, his beard ragged, his eyes darting too often to the forest. Breakfast was a bitter affair: stale bread, softened in brackish water, a few bites of smoked fish that tasted like leather dipped in ash. The men chewed in silence, glancing at the tree line as if half expecting the meal to end in blood. Hunger was gnawing at them, sickness creeping closer with every cough that rattled the air. A sailor spat into the sand, muttering that God himself must have cursed the voyage. Another snapped at him, accusing him of blasphemy, of drawing more misfortune on them all. Voices rose, hands clenched. For a moment it seemed fists would fly before Columbus stormed between them, his voice cutting sharp. "Enough! Do you want the savages to hear your bickering, and know you're cowards? Hold your tongues or I'll have them nailed to the mast when we return to Spain." His words carried weight, but not conviction. The men grumbled, turning away, their anger shifting from each other to him. You could feel it in the air. The authority he carried across the sea was fraying in the salt air and jungle heat. As the sun climbed, a small group of locals appeared again at the edge of the trees, their figures distant but unmistakable. They did not approach. They simply stood, watching. No laughter, no gifts, no gestures. Just eyes like dark coals, fixed on the sailors who scurried about with their crude hammers and saws. Columbus ordered the men to keep working, to act unafraid. But the swing of each axe was weaker than the last, each strike of hammer followed by furtive glances at the watchers. By midday, the watchers melted back into the forest. A collective breath escaped the men, though no one dared admit it. You caught yourself thinking of ghosts, of spirits who appeared and vanished with the sun. It was easier to believe in spirits than to face the truth. They were flesh and blood, and they were studying you as a predator studies prey. That night, another fever claimed a sailor. He writhed in the dirt, his skin slick with sweat, his breath coming in rattling gasps. The men whispered that he had been cursed by the painted warriors. When he died before dawn, his body was buried hastily in the sand, the grave shallow, the sea already reaching to reclaim him. The men crossed themselves, muttering prayers with trembling lips. Paranoia sank its claws deeper. A sailor accused another of poisoning the water casks. Another swore he had seen someone sneaking food from the dwindling supplies. Fists flew this time, blood spattering on the sand before Columbus's officers dragged them apart. The captain's voice thundered with rage, but it no longer sounded like command. It sounded like desperation. You felt it yourself, the quickening of your heart, every time a branch cracked. The way shadows seemed to move when you weren't looking. Even your fellow sailors, men you had shared bread and storms with, looked different now. Their eyes were wild, their hands too quick to reach for knives. The ocean had tested you with storms and hunger, but this land was testing something deeper, something in the soul that cracked far easier than bone. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, a quarrel erupted near the fire. Two sailors accused their mate of hoarding trinkets, beads, tiny flecks of gold, found in an abandoned village. They claimed he was hiding them, planning to bribe Columbus for favor when they returned to Spain. The accused denied it, his voice shaking, but when his pouch was forced open, the glint of beads spilled into the sand. The men roared with fury. Greed lit their eyes. The beads were trampled in the scramble, fists crashing into jaws, boots into ribs. By the time order was restored, two men lay bloodied and another with a broken nose, his face swollen and purple. Columbus, furious, ordered the trinkets gathered and presented to him. He claimed them as the crown's property, declaring no sailor would hoard what belonged to God and King. His words were loud, righteous, but his hands clutched the beads too tightly, his eyes gleaming with the same hunger he had condemned. The men saw it, and though none spoke, the truth passed between them like fire in dry grass. He was not above them. He was simply greedier, cloaked in titles. The days blurred, each one heavier than the last. Work on the fort slowed as men muttered of curses, of enemies unseen. Some begged to return to the ships, to leave this cursed land behind. Others snarled that leaving now meant failure, disgrace, and empty bellies on the voyage home. The arguments grew sharper, knives drawn more often than not. Columbus threatened lashings, but the threats rang hollow. He could not lash half his crew. He could not silence the growl of hunger or the fever's grip. And always the watchers. Some days they appeared at dawn, others at dusk. Silent, distant. Never approaching, never vanishing until the sailors' nerves had frayed to threads. A few men swore the numbers were growing, that more eyes peered from the trees each time. No one dared count aloud. The breaking point came one afternoon when a group of sailors, desperate and reckless, slipped away into the forest without orders. They returned hours later with baskets of fruit and meat, their faces wild with triumph. But behind them came shouts, the clash of voices not their own. A band of locals emerged from the tree line, their eyes blazing, their hands clutching spears. The stolen food was flung to the ground, the air thick with tension. Columbus thundered forward, spreading his arms, shouting words the locals could not understand, but his men could claims of peace, of friendship, of God's blessing. The locals shouted back, their voices sharp, gestures fierce. For a moment it seemed the air itself would ignite. Then, just as before, they retreated into the forest, their cries echoing until only the wind remained. The sailors erupted in chaos. Some shouted that the locals would attack at dawn. Others roared that they must strike first, take what they needed before it was too late. Columbus argued for restraint, for patience, but his words were drowned in the tide of fear and fury. That night, the camp was a tinderbox. Men huddled in groups, whispering, eyes darting toward the trees, toward Columbus, toward each other. The firelight flickered across faces carved with suspicion. Sleep came to none. You lay awake, your heart hammering, listening for footsteps that might belong to enemy or friend. By morning, 2 men were gone. Their hammocks lay empty, their belongings scattered. No one knew if they had fled into the forest, deserted to the ships, or been taken in the night. Columbus raged, calling them cowards, traitors. But his voice was brittle, his hands trembling. The truth no one dared speak was heavier than his anger. The unity that had carried you across the ocean was splintering, breaking apart under the weight of fear. The jungle was no longer just trees and vines. It was an enemy with 1,000 eyes. Every rustle of leaves was a threat, every bird's cry a warning. Even the ocean, once a promise of escape, now felt like a barrier, cutting you off from the world you once knew. You were trapped between forest and sea, between hunger and disease, between a captain's ambition and a people's fury. And if you thought fear had reached its peak, wait until you see what men will do when paranoia finally boils over into blood. The dawn began too quietly. Even the gulls, usually shrieking their greedy chorus, seemed muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. You felt it in your chest before you saw it, the heaviness, the prickling at the back of your neck, the certainty that something was waiting in the trees. The men muttered as they chewed their stale bread, eyes darting to the forest line, where no watchers stood this morning. The absence was louder than their presence had ever been. Columbus paced along the half-built walls of the fort, his boots thudding against the logs, his voice sharp with false calm. He spoke of discipline, of patience, of trust in God's plan, but his hands twitched at his sides. He looked less like a commander and more like a gambler, pretending the dice were not loaded against him. The men did not meet his eyes. Then it came, a cry from the jungle, shrill and fierce, followed by another, and another, until the air vibrated with sound. Shadows burst from the trees, bodies painted, spears gleaming in the morning light. The beach erupted in chaos. The sailors scrambled, some seizing blades, others clutching crossbows with trembling hands. Arrows hissed through the air, thudding into the walls, into sand, into flesh. A man beside you screamed as a shaft pierced his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The fort that had felt like a prison now became salvation. Men diving behind the rough logs, cursing and praying in the same breath. Columbus roared orders, though his voice was nearly swallowed by the din. "Hold the line! Fire, damn you, fire!" Crossbows twanged, bolts flying into the mass of attackers. A few fell, but more surged forward, their cries shaking the air. They hurled spears that clattered against wood, some finding gaps, slipping through to tear into flesh. The clash of steel against wood rang out as sailors slashed wildly, their blades sparking against spear shafts. You found yourself shouting, the sound torn from your chest without thought, as you thrust your weapon at a figure that leapt over the half-wall. His eyes were wide, his breath hot on your face, his hands strong as they shoved against you. The struggle was brief, desperate, the kind of moment where the world narrows to one heartbeat, one gasp, one strike. When he fell, the sand drank his blood, and you felt your stomach twist, even as your arms still trembled with the motion of the kill. Smoke burned your nostrils, though no fire had yet spread. The smell of sweat, of blood, of salt stung the air. The cries of men, Spanish and native alike, mingled into one ragged chorus of pain. The fort shuddered with each impact, logs rattling as if the whole structure might collapse. At last, a crack of thunder split the air, not from the sky, but from a musket fired by one of the officers. The sound was monstrous, louder than any drum, and for a moment both sides froze, stunned. The musket ball tore through the air, dropping a warrior mid-charge. Then another blast rang out, then another, smoke curling into the air like ghosts. The effect was brutal. The attackers faltered, fear flickering in their eyes as they faced a weapon louder, deadlier, and stranger than anything they had known. Some still pressed forward, brave or desperate, but the tide shifted. The sailors roared, emboldened, slashing, thrusting, driving back those who moments ago had seemed unstoppable. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The painted figures retreated, melting back into the trees with cries that echoed long after their bodies had vanished. The beach was left strewn with bodies, with broken spears, with blood soaking into the sand that only hours ago had been silver in the dawn light. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Only the moans of the wounded broke it, sailors clutching at pierced limbs, at torn bellies, their blood mingling with that of their enemies. The fort stood, but it felt hollow, fragile, as if the next wave would shatter it to splinters. Columbus strode among the fallen, his face pale but his voice strong, praising God for victory, praising the courage of the men. Yet his eyes betrayed him. You saw it when they flicked to the forest, searching, fearing, knowing this was not the end. His words could not hide the truth victory had cost too much, and it was only the beginning. The sailors slumped where they stood, blades still wet in their hands, staring at what they had done. Some crossed themselves, lips moving in frantic prayer. Others stared in silence, their faces ashen. One man vomited into the sand, his body shaking. You did not judge him. The stench of death clung to your own throat, bitter and sour. As the day wore on, the sun baked the beach, and the bodies began to swell to stink. The men muttered about what to do with them. Bury them, burn them, leave them for the sea. In the end, they dragged them into the forest, tossing them into shallow pits, their eyes closing only when the soil covered the painted faces. You wondered if the forest itself would reject them, spitting them back out at night like curses. When the work was done, the sailors gathered around the fire, their faces hollow. No one celebrated, no one sang. The silence was worse than grief, it was dread. They knew the fight was not over. They knew the forest would remember. Columbus stood apart, staring at the waves, his hands clasped behind his back. You wondered what he saw in the endless horizon. Glory, perhaps, or gold, or the throne of Spain shining like a beacon. But you knew what the men saw: blood in the sand, fear in the trees, and a future that promised only more of both. That night, sleep was impossible. Every crackle of the fire sounded like footsteps, every sigh of wind through the leaves like whispered threats. The men shifted in their hammocks, muttering in their dreams, jerking awake at shadows. You lay still, eyes open, heart pounding, waiting for the next cry, the next rush, the next storm of spears. The ocean had carried you across worlds. But here on this narrow strip of sand, you realized the truth: discovery had ended, and survival had begun. And if you thought the blood of strangers was haunting, wait until you see what happens when brother turns against brother. The fire had burned low, embers glowing red against the dark. When you first heard the whispers, they rose soft and sharp, carried on the night air like blades wrapped in cloth. Men hunched close, heads bowed, eyes darting to see who might be listening. Their words were not prayers, though they spoke them in hushed tones as if confessing to God. They were plotting. Mutiny. It had lingered for days, unspoken but alive, feeding on hunger, fear, and the sight of blood staining the sand. Columbus had led them across an ocean, but now men began to wonder if he was leading them only deeper into ruin. He promised gold, glory, God's blessing, but their bellies were empty, their comrades buried in shallow graves, and the forest whispered of enemies unseen. What good were promises when death pressed on every side? By day, the mutineers bit their tongues. They hauled logs, patched sails, gathered what little food they could scavenge. Columbus barked his orders, striding with the same sharp authority as ever, but his voice had taken on an edge of desperation. He demanded obedience louder, harsher, as though sheer volume might patch the cracks spreading through his command. But his men no longer saw a prophet. They saw a man clutching at power with white knuckles. The sickness spread, a cough here, a fever there. Men leaned on their shovels, sweat pouring from their brows, their eyes glazed. The fort smelled of rotten salt, of unwashed bodies of despair. Some swore the local spirits haunted the place, unseen hands dragging at their strength. Others muttered that God had turned his face away, disgusted at their bloodied hands. You weren't sure who was right, but you knew the smell of fear, and it hung thicker than the smoke from the fires. It was one evening, as the sun slipped into the sea, that the whispers grew bolder. A sailor named Martin, his face scarred and his eyes burning, spat into the sand, and said what others had only dared think. If Columbus leads us to death, then he leads us nowhere. Better we choose our own path. The words sent a shiver through the air. Some muttered agreement, some hissed warnings. Others glanced nervously toward the captain's tent. But the thought had been spoken, and once spoken, it could not be unspoken. That night, Columbus addressed the men, standing before the fort with a cross raised high, his voice booming against the dusk. He spoke of Spain, of the crown, of God's favor shining upon them. He promised riches beyond measure, lands flowing with gold, a legacy that would echo for centuries. His eyes gleamed with fire, his voice thundered with certainty, and for a moment, just a moment, you felt it. The pull of his vision, the heat of his belief. But then a cough hacked through the silence, rough and wet, and another man spat blood into the dirt. The spell broke. Columbus's promises rang hollow against the wheeze of dying lungs and the sting of salt in empty bellies. His men lowered their heads, not in reverence, but in quiet revolt. Days blurred. The locals returned only in glimpses, shadows in the trees, distant cries carried on the wind. They did not attack, but their absence was louder than war. The sailors grew restless, twitching at every sound, jumping at every rustle. Work on the fort slowed to a crawl. Men dragging their feet, their eyes dull. Columbus shouted, cursed, threatened lashings, but his words rolled off them like water on stone. And then, one morning, a discovery chilled the camp more than any painted warrior could have. A blade found buried in the sand, not where it belonged. A whisper that someone had crept too near Columbus's tent at night. No attack had been made, but the intent was clear. His enemies were no longer only beyond the trees. They were in his own ranks. Suspicion spread like wildfire. Every glance became a threat, every word a test. Friends avoided each other's eyes, fearing what secrets might be hiding there. The unity that had carried you across the ocean was gone, shattered into jagged pieces. Columbus, sensing the tide, grew harder. He carried himself like a prophet, but his eyes betrayed him. He doubled his prayers, kneeling in the sand until his knees bled, lifting his hands toward the heavens, as though he could drag God down by force. He promised salvation louder, wilder, his voice cracking as though even he no longer believed it. The men listened, but their eyes were elsewhere, on their meager food, on their sores and wounds, on each other. It was Martin again who struck the final spark. One night, as rain lashed the fort and thunder rolled, he shouted over the storm, his voice carrying through the dark. Why should we bleed for his dream? Why should we die for his glory? He will return to Spain a hero while we rot in the ground like dogs. The words hit harder than the thunder. Men cheered, others shushed them frantically, but the truth was laid bare. Columbus was no longer captain to many of them. He was a burden dragging them down. The storm raged, but the real storm was among the men. Knives flashed in the dark, voices rose, fists flew. The fort that had been built to keep enemies out became a cage for enemies within. You fought to hold them apart, to keep steel from finding flesh, but the fury was too great. Brothers who had once hauled sails together now clawed at each other's throats. And through it all, Columbus stood in the rain, his face illuminated by flashes of lightning. His lips moved, but not in orders. He was praying, eyes wild, arms raised to the sky. He did not shout at the men to stop. He did not command. He prayed, as though he had left them already, his spirit fixed on a throne only he could see. When dawn broke, the camp was wrecked. Men lay bruised, bleeding, some too still to rise. The rain had washed the blood into the sand, leaving only the smell of iron and smoke. The men avoided each other's eyes, ashamed or defiant, you could not tell which. Columbus emerged from his tent, robes clinging to his body, hair plastered to his face. He spoke little, only enough to declare that the crown would hear of their treachery, that God himself would judge them. His voice was steady but hollow. The fire that had burned so fiercely in him was guttering, flickering low. The days that followed were quieter, but not calmer. The men worked like ghosts, moving through tasks without words, their eyes dull, their shoulders bent. Columbus carried on his prayers, his promises, his visions of Spain's glory, but fewer and fewer men listened. He was a figure alone, a prophet without followers, a captain without a crew. And you, standing on that cursed sand, staring at the endless sea, felt the truth settle heavy in your bones. You had crossed an ocean not to find paradise, but to find the cracks in men's souls, the places where hunger and fear and greed tore them open. You had watched discovery turn to conquest, and conquest rot into madness. The waves rolled in, indifferent, washing over graves too shallow to hold their dead. The gulls screamed overhead, as if mocking the folly of men. The forest watched in silence, patient, eternal. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Spain waited, oblivious, ready to crown a man who would return not as a saint, but as the architect of both glory and ruin. If the ocean had taught you anything, it was this. The greatest danger was never the storm, nor the hunger, nor even the spears in the dark. The greatest danger was men themselves. When their dreams outgrew their reason, when their fears consumed their faith, when their hunger made them blind. And on that beach, with the taste of salt and blood still clinging to your tongue, you knew you had not discovered a new world. You had discovered the cost of chasing one.